Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to our today's story. Backstory: 25 years ago my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my two cousins who were both in their early 20s alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were very wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of the inheritance if a parent passes before the children reach age 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money straight out of a book of the Bible. Within 6 years, he was back to living in a condo working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his official salary and buying copious amounts of drugs. For the next 4 years my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Wretched woman. She saw my grandparents as payday and essentially baby-trapped my cousin, thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years they had 3 kids, so she is locked and tight. She's a nurse, and with 3 kids around they always needed a little boost. Guess who they would always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always lent a hand. My father, mother, sister, and I got sick of it very quickly. My grandmother, unfortunately, passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favorite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this, so much so that whenever they came to visit and I was not home, they would send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors so it couldn't be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far as to place one of those little mechanical noise makers in the cabinet in my room. The ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully, my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa, so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time I was 18 and in possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandfather has guns, but cannot aim and shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration. So when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need for self-defense arise. But should he see them out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container on my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the gremlins. One fateful day, I am out getting my grandfather food when I come home, and my older cousin, his wife, and my grandfather are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it, as a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was to, load my gun, and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was bullshit, and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house, but my cousin, who is a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave, and hadn't arrested me yet because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had won, or so he thought. The next day I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me and apologized, but he thought it best I move out until things cool down. But once they do, I would be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I am still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad, as they had sealed payday with Grandpa. It was time to move on to the uncle. This persisted for a month or two. I wouldn't stand for it. Then came the time for the will. My grandfather's lawyer read out the will to me, my father, mother, and sister in our home. Our 2 cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, per my grandparents' requests. Then the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was their way of saying if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father is supposed to receive every piece of physical property aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me from my grandparents, as he is the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive, to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it right. It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy bastard of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house as soon as possible, determined to snatch up as much as he could. A handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyways, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything, formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen wondering why it was all there when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up, which was true, but there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed, so he would duck himself over. It's worth noting that between the 18 years after my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over, so my cousin felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, his younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all, and she is still weeping over grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in 30 minutes which made him contemplate his sanity. Over greed. My cousin's witch of a wife filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from him in nearly 6 years, as he is all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and in this particular part of the story it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on. But honestly, I would rather have my grandparents. Now, here is the end of our first story. I hope you enjoyed the revenge OP took on his greedy asshole brother. Guys, I want to know your thought about OP's cousin and the revenge OP served him, so please share your opinion in the comments section. Also, before moving to the next story, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more revenge stories. Now, moving to our final story about the revenge I took on my father. The background: midway through my senior year at college, my father got the privilege of opening the first plant in China when his company was granted permission. He was getting everything, and I mean everything: business class on airfare, a penthouse, recognition in the company for being effectively in charge of the project, mingling with the higher-ups in the company, the works. This was exciting news for him because he was close to retirement, and it seemed that his hard work was finally paying off. My mom was happy because now, with my younger brother starting college and me about to graduate, she and her husband of over 30 years could enjoy their empty nest. She loves us dearly, but she called my father her soulmate and wanted to spend their golden years together. However, things turned upside down in less than a year. Maybe the power went to his head. Maybe he was overwhelmed and stressed out with having to start a new life in a new country. Or maybe it brought out the ugliness that was already in his soul. I have no clue. I finished my senior year around Christmas time, only to see my father pack up his bags and leave us, saying he didn't want to be married to my mom anymore and was seeing someone else. To say the rug had been pulled out from under our feet was an understatement. It was like everything we had ever known had imploded. My father left us shortly before Christmas, and we started putting the pieces back together. I started working 2 jobs and slipping money into my mom's wallet because I was terrified my father would cut off our money. It was during this time we started therapy, and all 3 of us came to the realization that this man had been emotionally, verbally, and financially abusing us for years. It's something I'm still trying to work through, and I doubt I'll ever fully recover. Come springtime, my father had a change of heart. He contacted us and started making amends. Something in me was suspicious and held back, but I was happy because Mom was happy. She had lost a lot of weight, was crying constantly, and was all in all miserable. He returned home for a 2-week vacation and then proposed a third honeymoon, if you will. He and Mom would return to China to work things out. My brother and I were staying back home as we were both busy with work and school. Mom and Father left us with some important numbers to call in case of an emergency, the email address of my father's immediate supervisor, whom I'll call Stan, and weekly Skype sessions so we could stay in touch. Mom and Father left for China and it seemed that everything would work out. 2 weeks later, it was time for our weekly Skype session. The first week had been fine and my brother and I were expecting to hear another good report. Instead of that, Mom was alone, her eyes swollen and her face red. I immediately went into Mama Bear mode and asked my mom in a voice that probably scared my brother and Mom, what happened? Mom, crying, tells us that after making the rounds with the higher-ups, my father had packed his bags, told her he was going to Shanghai for 2 weeks with his girlfriend, and then told Mom, I want you gone by the time I get back. Mom, floored by this, asked him how. Father, I don't care how. Then he left my mother in the penthouse with little food, no clean water to drink. We had been warned to never drink the water in China because it was nasty, to say the least, and no way to navigate through a country where she didn't speak the language or get away home. She said I think he was using me to look good at work. Everyone was saying they were glad we were working out our problems. When I heard that, my fury boiled. I am fiercely protective of my family and friends. You can do whatever you want to me, but make any of my family members or friends cry and you'll learn why it's a bad idea to pick on them. As much as I wanted to fly over to China, track down my father and his mistress, and make them feel every ounce of pain that my mother was feeling, I knew that wasn't a smart or practical idea. Instead, I'd have to embarrass him so everyone knew what a scumbag he is. And an idea came to mind. The plan. After getting the information I needed from Mom and calming her down, I worked on the first part of my plan, bringing Mom home back. I didn't have any money nor did I have a visa to visit. However, I did have Stan's email. Using the skills I honed from my creative writing and general business studies, I wrote a lengthy email to Stan, crying over the keyboard as I drafted it. I explained who I was, what was going on, and that I was worried for Mom. I asked him to please help me find a way to reach my mom and bring her home. I promised him that I would repay every penny, even if it took the rest of my life. I added my email and phone number as a finishing touch and asked him to contact me if he had any questions. After making sure it was perfect, a key lesson from my CW, Professor, make sure your writing is razor sharp, I sent it off along with a prayer that it would work. Stan never did return my email. But 24 hours later, Mom was safely home. I learned that Stan had gotten in contact with my mom within an hour of me sending the email, verified everything that had happened, and gotten her home on the first flight. I sent him another email thanking him for helping us, and told him I would repay the expense when I could. That time he did respond and said it's all right, thank though. That was the extent of our conversation, but I am still very grateful to him for helping Mom, out of his pocket if I'm not mistaken. He's earned my respect and I hope, wherever he is, he's doing well. When Mom got home, it sunk in for us that the marriage was truly over and we made plans to move on. They were divorced within a year and we moved to Florida for a fresh start maybe a few years later. Mom found the new love of her life, is working her dream job, something that never would have happened under my father, and is happier than I've seen her in a long time. My brother and I both are making our way into the world and finding ourselves after spending our lives as our father's perfect children. As time passed, I forgot about the email, until recently when Mom and I were talking about Stan and she revealed what had happened. The aftermath. I was just hoping to humiliate my father. Instead, my email launched massive legal and financial headaches for my father. Right after helping my mom get home, Stan decided that my father's behavior was worrying. Because if he's using his wife to hide the fact he has a mistress, what else is he hiding? And started an investigation into my father. What he learned was mind-blowing. Not only was his mistress one of his subordinates, which is strictly against company rules for reasons I can't remember, but he had another mistress on the side. Both of whom he was playing with expensive gifts and vacations, to name a few. But that wasn't the topper. What was evidence that my father might have been embezzling money from the company during his time in China. However, for reasons that I don't know, criminal charges were out of the question. Instead, what they did to him was even worse. My father was immediately demoted and sent home. His name was removed from the factory he had built and his mistresses fired. Now, with this company, most of the promotions come not from what you know but from who you know, and since Stan knows many people. Eventually, my father was forced to retire early before they fired him. He decided he had been discriminated against and tried to sue the company for unlawful termination. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming and he lost. Now he's disgraced, hated by nearly everyone, and with limited contact with his family and friends. He's still convinced that he's an innocent victim and that time will prove him right. But everyone knows the truth. Do I feel guilty about helping to bring down my father? I'll let Montresor's motto be my answer. Nemo me impune licessit, means no one attacks me with impunity. Now, this concludes our video for today. And I really felt bad for OP's mother, but I am glad OP served his father what he deserved. So before you guys leave, I want to know your opinion about OP's cheating father and the revenge OP took on him. Also, please like and subscribe if you want to keep up with such more amazing stories.